Hi everyone, welcome to the class. We were discussing the topic interpreting test scores, and in the last class we discussed norm reference interpretation of the test scores. In this class we are going to learn criterion reference interpretation of students test score. Very useful nowadays, even in researches. We are using criterion reference interpretation many times, and at the school level we are using criterion reference interpretation. Now we start the class. Let's start with the example of blood pressure. A person X got her blood pressure readings consistently 127/79. She is diagnosed by the doctors with the elevated level of blood pressures. Now here you can see the ranges given. These are the ranges, these are the criteria serve to interpret the level of blood pressure. When it comes 120 and 80 mmHg, it means the person has normal blood pressure. Then the blood pressure readings ranges 120, 129 diastolic pressure and less than 80 mmHg systolic pressure. It will interpret as elevated level of blood pressure, and these are the readings for high level blood pressure stage 1, and you can see the readings, the range is given for high blood pressure stage 2. These ranges serve as the criteria. You can see these are the ranges, and these ranges serve as the criteria for the interpretation of blood pressure among the people. These are some standards with which we compare our blood pressure and get the interpretation under which category it comes. Now we relate this example with the criterion reference interpretation of the student's test score. Here you can see the definition: when individual's performance is compared with some predetermined absolute criteria. The individual's performance, the student's performance is compared with some predetermined absolute standards with the predetermined criterion. We set the criterion, and after setting the criterion, we'll compare the student's performance with that criterion. It will be, the measure will be defined as criterion reference interpretation. And the second point says here, the judgment is concerned with the description of specific knowledge and skills with respect to the criterion. The judgment is concerned with the description of specific knowledge and skills with respect to criterion, and as in norm reference test, the judgment was concerned with the relative standing, relative position of the students in some known group. Here we are not concerned with the relative position of the students in a group. We are concerned with the absolute description of the specific knowledge and skills of the students. The third point, you can see judgment is concerned with mastery and non-mastery decisions. Mastery and non-mastery decisions. Either the student has mastered the material, either the student has mastered the content, or they have not. This is mastery and non-mastery decisions. If the students' scores are reach the criterion, suppose first of all we establish the criterion and we compare the student's score with that criterion. If the student's score reach the criteria or reach above the criteria, it will be mastery. And if the student's performance, if the student's competencies could not achieve to the could not come at the level of a particular criterion, could not reach at the level of the criterion, that will be non-mastery. So judgment here is concerned with the non-mastery and mastery decisions. Degree of mastery is not an issue, just mastery or non-mastery. According to CBSE competency-based education, CBSE in its competency-based education emphasized on the criterion reference testing of students at the school level. Features of criterion reference test. When the test is specifically designed for the criterion reference interpretation. It is criterion reference test. The purpose of a criterion reference test is to determine if the students has mastered the content area, mastered the domain of the test. Now here an important term comes, domain. The domain can be instructional content or instructional objectives or learning outcomes, learning skills we decide before, based on which we construct the test. The condition here, second point in the domains, it must be well specified, it must be precisely defined. Now the question comes, does criterion reference test only specify the domain or any other test, or in fact all tests define the domains? The answer is that in fact all the tests, all the achievement tests specify, well specify the domain of content or the domain of instructional objective. But the difference here is that in criterion reference test, it is narrowly and precisely defined domain. The domain here in criterion reference test is narrowly and precisely defined. But in the norm reference test or in any other type of test, domain is more diverse. In criterion reference test, it is so narrowly defined so that it covers its content very thoroughly. And the second is point is here that in criterion reference test, when we specify the domain, we write a larger number of items covering given content or instructional area. We write the larger number of items so that it appropriately covers the given content or given instructional area. The third point is criterion reference test can include variety of items. If it is fixed item type criterion reference test, we can use multiple choice question. When we are using the criterion reference interpretation as in the formative assessment, we can either take oral questions, short answer written questions, checklist, or we can give students the hands-on task. Number 4 point says that we need to be very careful while defining the criteria. It happens when the majority, sometimes it happens that majority of the students are not reaching up to the criteria. If the majority of the students are not reaching up to the criteria, that time either we need to look carefully and revise the criteria, or we need to revise the test items. Sometimes the reason can be that learning outcomes are not well defined. In those conditions, we need to look back and improve. Either we change the criteria, either we set or revise the criteria, set a new criteria, or we have to revise the learning outcomes, whether it is at the level of the students, or we need to revise the test items. Any reason can be happen. Set a criteria. While preparing a criterion reference test, we also need to define the criteria or set the criteria. Criterion reference test involve a criteria. It can be a cut score. In the traditional type of criterion reference test, we have cut score. It can be instructional objectives. The criteria which we set, it can be instructional objectives, very well specified instructional objectives, or the body of knowledge and skills, but it should be well specified. By comparing students' test score to a criteria or to a cut score, the student is either classified as being a master, having mastered the content of the test, or a non-master. So it is important to set a criteria, and for if we are setting a criteria, we need to look certain points. That is, number one, we can say, for choosing the criteria, if we are selecting the criteria, then we must give the rationale behind it, why we are taking certain cut score, why we are taking certain ranges, or certain guidelines for choosing the criteria. So rationale must be given, and it must be set with the experts, with the help of experts. Experts can be experienced teacher, or the experienced researcher, or the expert of that particular testing area. So it must be very carefully defined. The criteria must be carefully defined. The rationale behind choosing the criteria must be given, and it should be selected. It should be chosen with the help of some experienced, well-known expert of that particular area. One researcher in one research, it is given that you consider the sample of students' work. First, you collect the sample of the students' work on that particular test. You can do a piloting of the test and consider or collect a sample of the students, and based on those sample of the students, you can set the criteria. Uses of the test. It is very useful in diagnostic evaluation, when we need to diagnose certain learning difficulties in special education. We can use it to, and the second one is formative assessment. It can be used as formative assessment to monitor the students' progress in school program, or to report the students' progress to parents, to evaluate the effectiveness of interventions given. Interventions, we give educational interventions. Sometimes we give some um, instructional interventions, and to evaluate the program, to evaluate the effectiveness of the program, or to evaluate the effectiveness of the intervention, we use the criterion reference test. Criterion reference assessment that measure the attainment of learning outcomes are essential features of competency-based curriculum. NCERT has recommended the competency-based curriculum. CBSE recommended competency-based curriculum. In that particular curriculum, criterion reference assessment is very useful. And it also encourages the use of authentic, real world task-based assessment. Informative assessment, when we do the certain activities, and we have to base, we have to conduct the assessment based on certain activities. We can plan certain rubrics, certain guidelines as a set of criteria, and based on that rubric, based on that criteria, we can evaluate the students' performance. These are the references. Interested readers are encouraged to read these references. Thank you so much. In the next lecture, we will learn about the construction of criterion reference test. What are the necessary steps we should involve in our construction of criterion reference test. Thank you so much.